Hello ladies and gentlemen, I am the Omni viewer, and now that I have two books out on the market, one professionally published and one self-published, I figured now's a good time to get back into another author's take-on video. This time prompted by something that I thought was past, and yet someone recently decided to throw back in my face during a debate. As always, this happened on Twitter, a medium which I'm feeling less and less inclined to stay on with each passing day. But this particular debate, the subject doesn't really matter, honestly, but what does matter is that the person I was speaking to decided to get personal really quickly, and instead of trying to counter my points with other relevant points, instead decided to just try twisting things to defame my character. In particular, they brought up an older video in which I responded to the directors of the Godzilla anime trilogy. Maybe you remember that little incident. If you don't, here's the basic summary. The first two films in the Godzilla anime trilogy were met with a lot of negative criticism. Quite a bit of it very well articulated. I did my best to articulate my own points. And when the directors finally responded to it, their response was, "We don't care if we tick off the traditionalists because that means we did something different." The dismissiveness of that statement basically prompted a lot of us, myself included, to say, well fine, if you're not going to put any value in what we have to say, we're not going to bother with your last film. I know the trilogy's not done, but we don't care anymore, so bye. Now, my opponent in the debate tried to spin things to make it look like I overreacted, that I was just creating drama because that's what people wanted, and that ultimately the director didn't deserve such horrible treatment as to be criticized for putting out his work. Now, bear in mind, this person was also a fan of the Godzilla anime trilogy, which means he was not on the receiving end of that comment, so naturally he would not understand why it got under people's skin. But with that particular topic brought back up again, I was ready to just leave the whole thing in the past, but since it was brought up again, it got me thinking about how, as an entertainer, you should deal with criticism. And I think I sit in a rather unusual middle ground, because, like I said, I've got my own original works. I got 2 novels, I've got some original videos on this channel, but I also do a lot of reviews of other people's works. So on the one hand, I am putting out my own work to be critiqued, and on the other hand, I'm critiquing other people's work that they put out. So my perspective kind of comes from both sides of this particular topic. And thus, I think I can provide some good insights as to how you as an entertainer should respond to criticism. Here's the thing, and this is undeniable. If you want to make it as an entertainer, you have to expect criticism to come your way. If you have a piece of work that you have deemed worthy of letting out into the world for other people to experience, you are basically opening that work up to the analysis and critique of those who choose to experience it. That just comes with the territory. And personally, I think if you take the time to read someone's book, watch someone's movie, sit through an entire season or multiple seasons of TV, or play an entire game or whatever, you basically have the right to say what you think about it, regardless of what that might be. And the thing is, if your work is open to feedback, it is automatically open to all kinds of feedback. Yes, we love it when we get positive comments and positive reviews, but we're gonna get negative reviews too. That comes with the territory. No work of entertainment has 100% universal appeal. Somebody somewhere isn't going to like it. That's just the way it is. Even stuff that gets mostly positive reception is still going to have somebody who goes, well, I don't get it. And that's inevitable. You can't really say that person is wrong for not getting it, or for maybe pointing out some issues that you might have missed, or anything really. They even have the right technically to just say, this is crap and I don't like it. even though that sort of comment isn't really helpful if you're trying to move forward and improve. I mean, they still have the right to say it. People reviewing your work is not something you can control. What you can control is how you respond to those reviews. And different people have different ways of responding. Some people fall into substance abuse to dull the pain and wind up ruining their lives. That I do not recommend. One common bit of advice you'll find in entertainment is never read your own review. When the reviews come out, just avoid them, let other people read them, and make their own decisions, but you don't need that sort of thing in your life. I don't necessarily know if I completely agree with that, because a lot of the people who say that you should never read your own review, they generally only mean you shouldn't read the negative reviews. You'll definitely want to read the positive reviews, according to these people, and if they are presented with positive reviews, you bet that they will gobble them right up, frame them on the wall, tell people, hey, you know, this review says I'm pretty good. But they'll be dismissive of the negative reviews. So, kind of a double standard at play there, where you don't read your own review, but only certain types of review. It just doesn't sit well with me. However, one way you could reinterpret this rule is don't get hung up on your reviews, particularly not the negative ones. It is possible, and I've seen this happen many times and even experienced it myself on occasion, that you can get 100 positive comments, 100 positive reviews of what you're doing, but there will be one negative in there, and it just sticks in your mind, digs itself in, grows roots, and refuses to leave, and it can really get at you. If you're the kind of person for whom that can happen, then yeah, maybe you shouldn't read your reviews. Maybe you should leave that to your parents or your significant other or your siblings or whoever is in your life that helps you out with your process. Yeah, I can understand that part of it. But then again, at the same time, the argument can also be made that if you're going to be putting yourself or your work out there for scrutiny, you'll also have to have a thick skin. And how else do you develop a thick skin about taking criticism if you don't expose yourself to it every once in a while? It's like building up muscle mass. You lift the weights to tear the muscle so it rebuilds itself stronger. It's kind of a fine line to walk. You don't want to get dragged down by the negative. You don't want to be just blinded by only the positive. And I don't think you want to completely avoid feedback entirely, because then you may not know what you're doing right or wrong. So it's definitely a balancing act. But you may recall I opened this video by recounting an incident in which I responded to an entertainer responding to criticism. And this is where I think the lesson really needs to be learned. For a very long time, entertainers who didn't get the best reviews, they usually kept it to themselves. Not to the point where they just bottled it up and ignored it. There are reports you'll hear of people who directed certain unpopular movies or wrote certain unpopular stories, and friends and family will say, well, in private or in their journals, they said, one day they'll understand, my work is just not appreciated, and history marched on and they proved to be vindicated after all, sometimes. But either way, they didn't really broadcast it out loud. That's changed recently. Recently, we've had a lot of entertainers in all different mediums sort of lashing back. Sometimes they preemptively lash back. They'll say, if you don't like this, then you are whatever the popular ism is of the day. Like, remember with the latest Terminator movie where they said up front that we have strong female characters, and if you don't like that, you're automatically a misogynist. And yeah, that automatically got people angry, and the movie wound up flopping not because it had female leads, but rather because it was bad. But the whole claim of only misogynists don't like it sort of muddied the waters up front. I don't necessarily want to get into that rabbit hole too deep, but the fact of the matter is, that's just one example of entertainers striking back at the audience. And that was a rare preemptive strike, but it just as frequently comes after the work fails. And I think that is a huge, huge mistake. That is something that you really shouldn't do. Actually, let's go back to my original example. The creative team behind the Godzilla anime trilogy writing off all of their critics as traditionalists. Now, as far as the kind of ists that critics could have been called, traditionalist seems pretty mild, doesn't it? I mean, it doesn't imply that you hate a specific group of people that are marginalized. It means that you're just stuck in your ways and you refuse to move on. Now, I'd love to know, if I may diverge for just a moment, I'd love to know what exactly I am a traditionalist for in the Godzilla fandom. I mean, what exactly counts as tradition in Godzilla? Does that mean that I'm only a fan of the 1954 original? Does it mean I'm only a fan of the Showa films? Does it mean I'm a fan of the Showa and the Heisei films? Does it mean I like Godzilla as the villain, or Godzilla as the hero, or Godzilla as the morally gray anti-hero? Does it mean I only like what we see in the MonsterVerse? Does it mean I only like the 98 film? Does that fit in there anywhere? What exactly is my tradition as a traditionalist? It's a claim that doesn't really work. But the thing is, it doesn't need to make sense. It just needs to provide a label that you can gather all of your detractors under and then use it to just brush them away. That's why it got under people's skin, because it was dismissive. The word itself wasn't that big of a deal, it was the sentiment behind it. By labeling all of the detractors as traditionalists, whether they were people who just said, your movies suck and I don't like them, or they were people, like me, who took a lot of time to articulate all of their critiques and explain everything that was wrong with these movies, all of us were just lumped together under a single dismissive label. I mean, that doesn't garner a lot of goodwill. I mean, okay, let me use myself in a hypothetical example. Like I said, 2 books out there. I keep reminding you because I want you to buy them, but I have 2 published books. Now, Operation Red Dragon has been out for longer than Occult Mafia, so it's had more time to get more reviews. And most of those reviews have been positive, I'm happy to say. Not telling you that to impress you, I'm just stating the facts. I have gotten some less than favorable reviews. Some of them are just the single sentence, it sucks, don't bother kind of reviews. There is at least one person who has leveled some rather harsh accusations in his analysis of my work, and I know who he is, by the way. I figured it out, kind of by accident, which means I also know exactly why he would be motivated to tear down my work and the work of others, but to say anything more would be to give clues about his identity, so I'm gonna cut myself off right there. That particular critique, I'm pretty certain I can write that one off because I know there's ulterior motive behind it. But on the other hand, there are some less than favorable reviews I've gotten, and even some positive reviews, that have pointed out certain flaws in Operation Red Dragon. Things like how, because the cast of characters is so huge, that some of them don't wind up getting as much development as others. And you know what? I completely agree with that. I actually did kind of feel that a couple of characters could have gotten some more attention, but there was no way I could think of, as I was finishing it up, to really fit that sort of development in naturally. Now, I could use the excuse that it's the first book of a series and that development for those other characters will come later, but why would I use that as an excuse? Does it excuse not doing it in the first place? Maybe not. So, I'm just going to take that into account, and I did my best to give all of my characters in the Occult Mafia equal amounts of attention and development. I don't know how good a job I did yet, because at this moment it doesn't have as many reviews as Operation Red Dragon. And I'm going to try and give the characters who got sidelined in Red Dragon Part 1 and give them more development in Part 2. So, negative feedback I received, but I'm learning from it. And I am taking it to heart as I move forward. Now, obviously, I'm under no obligation to take any of the negative critiques to heart as I move forward, but some of them I do, and I'm at least going to consider some of them as I go forward. But that's how I respond to it. I think that there is some merit in what these people are saying. But imagine for a moment that I took everyone who said something negative about Operation Red Dragon and lumped them all together as idiots who don't know what they're talking about. The person who made a well thought out and well written critique, and the person who just said, this sucks, it's stupid, and the one guy with ulterior motives, I decided they were all equal and all equally worthless. And so their opinion should be dismissed. Imagine I did that. That would basically be sending the message that I will accept no critiques other than that which bolster me up as a genius. Again, it's all hypothetical, but if I did it, then the people who gave those critiques, regardless of how well thought out they are, would not be inclined to experience my work in the future, and be even less inclined to be forgiving of it if they ever did. And that's the other thing. If you're more open to critics being allowed to speak, and you don't go off and strike back against them, that gains you a lot of goodwill that will help you in the future. This is getting away from literature and into Hollywood, but look at the likes of Rian Johnson and Brie Larson, people who struck back at the fans, writing off their detractors with dismissive and sometimes downright inflammatory labels, and people loathe them these days. But on the other hand, you had Henry Cavill, who in an interview to promote The Witcher was confronted with a question about toxic fans, and he said, now wait a minute, they're not toxic, they're passionate. And I can understand that. They really care about this stuff, so naturally they have strong feelings about it one way or the other. And frankly, you would expect Henry Cavill might strike back because he's played Superman in 3 of the most hated comic book movies ever made. But he didn't. Whether or not he actually does believe it, who can say? I don't pretend to speak for him. It seems genuine, but for all I know, he has a little voodoo doll labeled critics that he goes home to and pounds and sticks with pins before going to bed each night. I don't think that's the case. He sounded like he really meant it. But the fact is, he said it still, and that gained him a lot of goodwill. Before that moment, you had people saying, man, Henry Cavill was so wooden as Superman. Why did they cast him? His performance was terrible. I did not like him in that role. And then after that role, suddenly people were saying, you know what? I kind of liked Henry Cavill as Superman. Can't say he had the best scripts or directors to work with, but he did a good job. He's okay. And now people are clamoring for him to come back as Superman and to have Man of Steel 2 and to appear in the Snyder Cut of Justice League. And all it took was for him to say he doesn't think that not liking something automatically makes you toxic. And fans loved it. Basically, the way an entertainer should deal with criticism is a lot like walking a tightrope. You don't want to lean too far to one side or the other because that'll throw you off balance, meaning you don't want to lean too far to the positive or negative because it'll warp your perception. But at the same time, you also don't want to insult the people who are holding the net underneath you, because if you happen to fall, they might just happen to pull the net away and let you land hard on the ground. Like I've said in the past, an entertainer without an audience is a hobbyist, or unemployed even. You want your audience on your side. Even if they don't necessarily like what you did at one point, they could still potentially come back and keep giving you more chances if you don't lash out at them, and if you show signs that you actually do want to improve. Basically, you gotta be an adult about it. And that's really some advice that I think should be taken to heart. Like I said, I've got 2 books. They've gotten some positive feedback and some negative feedback. Well, this one hasn't gotten negative feedback yet, but it hasn't been out as long as this one. I'm sure it'll come. I don't know what form it'll take. But whatever happens, I'm just going to keep moving forward. I'll take each review under advisement as they come, and I'll just continue to try improving anyway. And I certainly hope that if you have any aspirations to become an entertainer, whether in books or in movies or in any capacity, you're able to walk that tightrope. Because if you don't, you're gonna fall and you're gonna land hard, and you may not be able to get back up again. I don't necessarily want to see people fail that badly, so there's my advice. You can take it or not. It's entirely up to you. Until such time as we meet again, this is the Omni Viewer signing off. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like and subscribe, then go down to the description to find links to follow us on DeviantArt, Patreon, and Twitter. While you're there, you'll also find the Amazon links for the original novels Operation Red Dragon, The Daikaiju Wars Part 1, and The Occult Mafia. 2 books I think you'll really enjoy. Thank you all, and we appreciate your support.